Tonight, a big drop in inflation, an early Christmas present for Rishi Sunak. Well, there's now speculation the Bank of England could cut interest rates as soon as February after inflation drops faster than expected, from 4.6% down to 3.9%. Also tonight, Ireland is taking the UK to court over its plans to end prosecutions of those accused of murder and terrorism in Northern Ireland. Major disruption in England as junior doctors get their festive strike underway. And we'll look at another Christmas political tradition when PMs visit the troops for a festive lunch. All that and more with Ayesha Hazarika and Dominic Grieve, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Good evening. So there is a nice little early Christmas present for everyone today because inflation, as we were just saying, has fallen from 4.6% to 3.9% last month. It's a bigger fall than expected and politicians will be cheering it, particularly, of course, given Rishi Sunak's decision to put bringing inflation down right at the heart of his pledges. But you know what? It's really important to emphasise that this doesn't mean prices are coming down. It just means they're going up slightly less quickly than before. And all the rises in the cost of living that we've seen over the last year or so, well, they're baked in. So, plus, to make things worse, the cost of Christmas in particular has gone up 5% on last year, according to research by the Sky data team. So pigs in blankets, one of the biggest rises, with sausages and bacon both up 14%. Men's socks, they're up nearly 5%. Obviously not that I would advocate buying socks for your loved ones, of course, at the festive time. But, you know, the serious point that I'm trying to make is if you're feeling irritated by all the headlines saying, isn't it great how inflation's falling because you still feel skint and everything still feels really expensive, well, you are right. And we will try and make sure that we remember that on tonight's show as well. First then, let's run you through some of the key takes, shall we, on today's numbers. The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, said that once inflation comes down, better growth might be next.
Once you do the hard work to squeeze inflation out of the system, you can start looking forward to the kind of growth that will see people's wages going up. On top of which, when we can, we want to bring down the tax burden so that people keep more of the money that they earn every month.
The Chancellor striking quite an optimistic tone there, and the markets do seem to agree because they're predicting 4 interest rate cuts next year. But will the Bank of England deliver? Our business correspondent Paul Kelsey has been looking at the numbers.
Thanks, Sophie. A difficult economic year has ended with some rare good news. Inflation is falling, even if prices are not. This is consumer price inflation from 2019, when it was around the 2% target. Since the war in Ukraine, it looks more like the mountain stage of the Tour de France, climbing above 11% before descending, accelerating in the last couple of months, a bigger than expected fall in November, down to 3.9%. That's still double the Bank of England target, but good news nonetheless. Now, we can see how that inflation breaks down by each sector of the economy here. The red bars are October's numbers, the blue is November's new numbers. Now, we can see alcohol and tobacco and food, both inflation rate down by almost 1%, though food inflation, your Christmas dinner, still 9% higher than it was. Restaurant inflation is static, but clothing and footwear and recreation and culture, price rises slowing there. It's the bottom two that are really interesting. We can see actual deflation in transport, which includes fuel costs, prices going down, you'll have noticed that at the pump if you filled up your car, and household services, which includes energy bills. They've fallen most of all. Now, we know inflation falling doesn't mean prices are falling, just they're rising less fast. And inflation for some costs are still going up, including private rental prices. Now, the red line here is London prices, blue the rest of the UK. But both of these are up above 6% and climbing. Now, more than a third of households in Britain rent their home. So these are crippling costs for many people. The question now is whether the Bank of England will cut interest rates faster than we thought in response to inflation falling faster. The governor said it's too soon to even talk about cuts, but the markets disagree. This is where they think the rate cuts will happen After these inflation figures, they're now thinking the first cuts will come in the spring. Previously, it had been into the summer and could continue falling down below 4% from 5.25 today by the end of the year. Now, all of this will be good news for consumers and the Prime Minister, desperate for something to change the political weather, but everything is relative. Compared to September 2021, food prices today are almost a third higher, and energy bills are two-thirds up on where they were. And that's why, for many, the cost of living squeeze is far from over.
Paul Kelsey there talking us through all the figures and what they mean. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Bank of England. There's been lots of scrutiny of how the Bank of England has acted throughout the last couple of years. And with inflation coming down, but growth still basically as flat as a pancake, there has been some questioning of whether the Bank of England is being too slow to cut interest rates. Remember, high interest rates aren't just bad news for mortgage holders. They can also stifle the economy too in a bid to try and keep inflation down. Hindsight is the great thing, of course, but some people have been saying similar for a little while now, including the bank's former chief economist, Andy Halliday. And this is what he told me back in September.
I'd have stopped a couple of rises ago, in truth. So I think there's enough in the tank already by way of tightening.
So they've overshot, you think? Maybe?
I think there's a risk of overshooting, and I hope there's not further overshoot. Because I think there's enough tightening in the tank already to take inflation down to the sorts of levels where people stop talking about it.
Andy Haldane there. Well, joining us now is the Managing Director of Iceland Supermarket, Richard Walker, a man who's dabbled a little bit in politics as well, which we can chat about a bit later too. Great to have you on the programme. Fall in inflation, will it be welcomed by your customers?
Well, as you pointed out, it's not a fall in inflation. It's nothing's gone down. It's just that they're not rising as fast as they were. And of course, that is welcomed by my customers because we're not in this endlessly increasing upward inflationary cycle. And whenever we get cost price reduction from our supply base, we pass it on as soon as we can. So, for example, the amount of our £1 lines, which are really important to our core customer, we're doubling those to 1,000 in January. And we're able to do that because we're starting to see lower prices from suppliers. So we do everything we can, but you know, our customers aren't celebrating, and they are still in a cost of living crisis. You know, so a decline in the rate of interest is not a reversal in the cost of living crisis for my customers, which is why it's a little bit unedifying to see Rishi celebrating that he has single-handedly halved inflation, when of course we know that it's nothing to do with him. It's the Bank of England and global economic factors.
It's interesting to hear your assessment of the politicians' reaction. Do you think it's become a bit of a political football then?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you know, I think there's 11 days to go for his 5 targets. So he'll meet one of them, which is this, to halve inflation. But it was always disingenuous because, as I say, it's nothing to do with him. And I saw on Instagram the other day that the Tories have put out a post saying Rishi has halved inflation, which, you know, they've got to have a pretty low opinion of the intelligence of their audience if they think people will believe that. It's global economic factors, but you know, it hasn't been helped domestically by Trussonomics and some of the policies there, which of course led to higher interest rates and higher mortgages for people. So that kind of work by the Conservatives is slowly unravelling, but thanks to the Bank of England.
You were speaking about how things are still very difficult for a lot of your customers, and I just wondered if we could talk a bit more about that as well. I did an interview with you a little while ago, right at the centre of the cost of living crisis, when you were talking about how, very frankly and candidly, that, you know, your main rival is food banks, that, you know, you see people putting things on the checkout and then having to stop and putting stuff back on the shelves once they hit their £40 limit. What kind of behaviour are you seeing in your stores?
It's interesting. It's still very difficult because prices are higher than they've ever been. But I almost think the cost of living narrative has become sort of normalized a bit because we've been talking about it for so long, but we mustn't underestimate the reality for many of my customers and many people out there around the UK. It is really, really tough. So yeah, we're still, hearing stories of people really managing their budgets, or indeed having to turn to food banks, which, by the way, is no one, least of all those people, would want. So we need to do everything we can as a business to try and help them, and as a country, which is why I talked about these £1 lines. But you may have heard we're now offering micro loans to people so that they can afford to buy food in our shops. They're interest free, so we pay the interest. But those gaps in income throughout the year mean that it really is still very difficult at certain times. We also offer a 10% discount to anyone over the age of 60 in store every Tuesday. Tens of millions of people have now taken advantage of that, which shows you just how gratefully it's received. And it just feels to me that everyone is struggling. Pensioner poverty is a reality. Young families struggling to manage their family budgets is a reality. Students are struggling. Everyone's struggling. So let's hope that this trend continues, that rates continue to come down, and that we start to see a reversal in food prices, especially in the new year. That's certainly what we're planning.
I want to talk to you a little bit about interest rates as well. We heard Andy Haldane talking just before speaking to you. Some people are arguing that, look, the Bank of England was a bit slow to raise rates, but now they're being a bit slow to cut them. From a business perspective, how worried are you about growth and the possibility of a recession even?
I think a recession, when you're really bumping along at zero growth, is always a concern. And I suppose if you look over the long term, a lack of productivity and a stagnating economy, a lack of growth is really our kind of biggest challenges domestically. So it is an issue. We've managed to grow market share, and we've kind of done the right things for our customers. But generally, UK PLC, and its attractiveness to overseas investors, but also to keep growing our domestic economy so that everyone can, have a better quality of life and improve. That is undoubtedly still a challenge. We've got to get growth back. And actually, it's encouraging to see both sides of the political divide recognise that as the big challenge.
Let's talk politics, shall we? Because
shall we? No.
I'm sorry, we've got to do it. It's a political show. I'm going to force you, because I'm quite intrigued. You were trying to be a Conservative Party candidate. Now you're not. What happened?
Well, they didn't want me. I got on the approved list of candidates. But they put a deferment next to my name, which means that I wasn't allowed to run in any seat, including my home seat, where I've lived all my life. And it was very strange. No one would ever give me the reason why. I was told it was because I was chairman of Surfers Against Sewage, and I don't know. You're a bad Tory if you don't want excrement in the sea. I was also told off by very senior figures in the party about my outspoken views on food banks. As you said, we've talked about that before. It's a reality. I'm seeing it up and down the country, and I refuse to change my values and principles to suit a party that I think has itself lost its way. So I'm quite enjoying my newfound freedom to speak out on issues that really matter to me and really matter to our customers. At the end of the day, I think my take on it was that the Conservative Party don't want people with genuine views, experience, or opinions of their own.
Who would you vote for if there was an election tomorrow then?
That's a good question. Well, there's no manifestos yet, so I don't know. But
that's a politician's answer.
I wait to be convinced, and we'll see. Hopefully, someone else can step up into this gaping void. Is the country in a better place than it was 13 years ago? Of course it's not. And we have major issues. We've talked about economic issues, but what about our social inequality, regional inequality, and of course, environmental problems that we're facing? We desperately need a party to step up into this chasm and run Britain and hopefully get us back on our feet.
Thank you. It's been really interesting to talk to you this evening, so thanks very much for coming on the programme.
No worries, thanks.
Right, let's bring in tonight's duo, shall we? We're talking to the former Labour advisor, Ayesha Hazarika, and the former Conservative MP and Attorney General, Dominic Grieve. Great to have you both on the programme today. Hi. Dominic, what's your take on this when it comes to inflation, interest rates, the balance of that, the state of the economy?
Bringing inflation down is better than a poke in the eye with a blunt stick. It's clearly good news. And in fairness, let's put it this way, it may have come down because of what the Bank of England is doing, but it's also come down because of what the government isn't doing. The point was made, Trussonomics fueled inflation. Jeremy Hunt is clearly a stabilising influence at the Treasury. And the government has got a policy for bringing down inflation, even if they are not the people who are delivering it. That said, inflation remains a very big problem. And I think it's easy to forget, we all keep on talking about the Ukraine, but actually Brexit has fueled inflation massively. We get 28% of our food from the EU. And the price of food from the EU has been dramatically raised by the problems of being outside of the single market. So, and it's going to potentially get worse again when the checks are introduced next year, which are going to produce more delays for imports from the EU. So I reserve judgment on whether we're going to be able to sustain this. But yes, it is good news. Of course it is. And if you want growth, you have got to have low inflation rates. It's absolutely essential. Inflation is massively destructive. And we've had inflation brought into our system by a number of routes. The Ukraine's contributed as well, I accept that. And if you look at where it's coming down, it's all about fuel prices. So I'm afraid there is still a lot more to be done.
OK. Do you accept that the government deserves a bit of credit?
Well, look, I think if inflation was going up, we'd all be slagging them off. So I think
Fair
if
enough.
with inflation going down, that's it's a good thing for the country. But I think the point that you made at the beginning of the show is incredibly important, and the point that is being made repeatedly on social media. I'm not brilliant at maths, but I think it's wrong to send out a signal that prices are coming down. That's not what this means. And as you've explained, as Richard from Iceland explained, my goodness, the shock that everybody has had over the last few years, where you have a situation where people are going out working really, really hard and their wages are just not matching the rise in putting food on the table, keeping the house warm for the kids. And it's, getting to the point where even though energy prices are coming down, they're still so high compared to sort of what we're used to. And all of this has contributed to the decline in our economy. Dominic's absolutely right. Brexit has played a part, inward investment, but then also look at our crumbling infrastructure, look at decisions like cancelling HS2, look at the fact that it's very difficult to get on a train in this country. So I think there's a number of factors coming into play. Of course, there's geopolitical issues. And by the way, Ukraine isn't over. We don't know what President Putin is going to do in the future. We've got this conflict in the Middle East. If that spreads out into being a regional conflict involving, OPEC countries, then that could have another squeeze on things. So this is all very precarious and very, very fragile. So if I were the government, I would definitely, humbly say that this is a good thing. But I wouldn't be sort of, getting the bunting out at this stage because, anything could happen and people are still really struggling.
I did think about you when Richard Walker was talking about the Conservative Party not wanting a diversity of views in it any longer. Do you have some sympathy there?
I have 100% sympathy, and I'm very sorry he's been treated in that way. And if that is the case, then I'm afraid it's another sign that the party is still, I think, way off the rails. And he was asked the question, how are you going to vote next election? I don't know how I'm going to vote at the next election.
You don't know how you're going to vote?
I haven't a clue. No, I might even spoil my ballot. I am very troubled by the direction of travel of the Conservative Party. And whilst I acknowledge that to bring it back on the rails, you have to be involved with it. So if you just pull out of it, it's going to drift off in a worse direction. I'm not completely confident it is going to come back in the right direction.
How did you vote the last election?
On the last election, I didn't vote at all.
There you go.
I was standing as an independent in my own constituency and in my own London constituency, I went and spoilt my ballot. So that was that.
I mean, I just think this is extraordinary. You have incredibly... Now, Dominic and I probably don't agree on everything. Our politics are different. But here you have an incredibly smart, able, talented man. Same with Richard from Iceland. There are so many good politicians that have been kicked out of the Conservative Party for having a different viewpoint. Essentially, this all came from Brexit. And you do sort of think, for the state of the country, it is a shame that people who are clearly talented, able and wanting to be in politics are being blocked from playing their part.
You have to buy a drink afterwards for saying those nice things about you.
Well, that's very kind of... But you're right. And as I say, if they can't accommodate somebody who's clearly got the offering that Richard Walker can give, then that is a very bad sign. And you know, some of the things, I mean, I can't believe, I hope it isn't about the sewage issue. I mean, the sewage goes back long before the current Conservative government. The truth is we have not invested in infrastructure when the population's been rising. So that it's as simple as that. It goes back over 30 or 40 years.
Thanks. Really interesting discussion to begin tonight's programme. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. A diplomatic and legal row erupts as the Irish government sues the UK over the Northern Ireland Legacy Bill.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute. Okay.
We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited. We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well? I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me.
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hello, welcome back. Now, we talked a lot in recent weeks about the European Convention on Human Rights, and some Conservative MPs have said we should pull out so the government can start putting asylum seekers on flights to Rwanda. Well, today it's emerged the European Court will host another diplomatic and legal row, this time with the Irish government. Ireland is unhappy at a section of a controversial new law that grants immunity to former soldiers and militants involved in the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Here's our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins.
The gunfire still echoes. The Troubles and the attempt to address the legacy of them continue to cast a shadow. It's the first time in half a century that the Irish government has taken legal action against the UK government.
It is something that we're genuinely doing with a sense of regret. We prefer not to be in this position, but we did make a commitment to survivors in Northern Ireland and to the families of victims that we would stand by them, respect their wishes, and also stand by the Good Friday Agreement.
10 people were shot dead by the British Army at Ballymurphy. Danny Taggart was one of them.
He was shot 14 times.
His family has welcomed the Irish government's decision.
It's an early Christmas present. The victim survivors, I think it'll be welcomed by all sectors, all politicians. It's a big step for us because it actually takes the burden off the victims themselves. We've been campaigning, all victims across the board, been campaigning for this bill to be scrapped.
They chained Patsy to this van, which was loaded with 1,200 pounds of explosives.
The IRA turned Patsy Gillespie into a human bomb, killing him and 5 soldiers. When the bill passed, his wife Kathleen felt robbed of justice.
What they did to Patsy has been condoned. And all the other atrocities are being condoned. At the end of the day, they're getting away with what they've done. So let me ask whoever's listening to this, how would you feel if you were in my position?
The pain of the past lingers here. Granting an amnesty to veterans and terrorists who provide information won't ease it. Those who lost most during the conflict refused to choose between truth and justice.
Well, David joins us now. David, what does this tell us about the relationship between the Irish and UK governments?
Well, quite a lot, really. It was 1971 when the Irish government last took a case against the UK government to the European Court of Human Rights, so 52 years ago. And I think that does tell us how bad relations are between Dublin and London post-Brexit. But how did we get here? Well, quite simply because the UK government was determined to end the prosecution of former British soldiers for historical offences in Northern Ireland. So they tabled this legislation granting them immunity if they cooperated with a new truth recovery body. That horrified the families of those who had died as a result of state violence, but it equally horrified the families of those who'd been killed by terrorists, because they too are granted an amnesty as a result of this legislation if they cooperate with the same truth recovery body. And the victims' families say they're not simply prepared to choose whether they have the truth or they have justice. Now, the Irish government says it has no option but to take this action because the legislation, in their opinion, is in contravention of the European Convention on Human Rights, which obligates countries to pursue justice for unlawful deaths. But also, they say it is incompatible with the Good Friday Agreement and believe it is their responsibility as co-guarantor of that agreement to uphold it. That's why we find ourselves in this situation. But I think it is important to remember that the Tory government is honouring a manifesto pledge to prohibit the prosecution of veterans who once served on the streets of Northern Ireland. And equally important to note that Sinn Féin, the opposition in the Republic, is breathing down the neck of the Irish government on this issue. And next year is election year in the Republic of Ireland too. So as always, this isn't just about the law, it's about politics.
Very important context to bring us there. David Blevins, thank you very much indeed. Well, joining us now to discuss this further is Sir Robert Buckland, the former Justice Secretary, now Chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. Great to have you on the programme.
Thank you, Sophie.
Today. Firstly, do you agree with the UK government's decision to grant immunity to people who cooperate with the new independent commission looking at the Troubles?
Well, I'm speaking in a personal capacity. I did support the bill and I did work on the preliminary policy basis to deliver the bill when I was still in government. And there's no doubt that there had to be, I think, despite all the horror and the concern and the anguish that people feel, there had to be some movement here, not just because of prosecutions, but because of the large number of inquests that, by on a Conservative estimate, would take many, many years to work their way through. Now, that's not just an issue for the UK government, it's an issue for the Irish government as well. And You know, I'm very concerned today that relations have got to a point where both governments are now in a sort of standoff on an issue that they really need to be working closely together with, on the basis that information needs to be shared with the victims of violence.
You're talking there about the two governments. I'm interested in that. David touched on it when he was saying the last time this happened was all the way back in 1971. I mean, how bad are relationships?
Well, look, that was all about actions taken by the British government about the way people were being interrogated. I mean, we were right in the heat of the Troubles. We're in a very different world now. I think what I'd say is that I draw attention to the Stormont House Agreement of 2014, which talked about dealing with legacy issues. There was an agreement that both governments would work together. There'd be a collaborative approach. And the committee that I now chair did produce some findings back in 2020 to encourage that collaborative approach.
But just to zoom out...
That doesn't seem to be happening.
Just to zoom out, the Irish government is taking the UK government to court. I mean, a lot of people will be like, what on earth is going on? What has happened to pit these two governments against each other in this way?
Well, I think that there was a feeling, clearly, that the UK government had gone too far ahead of itself in terms of acting unilaterally. I mean, I agree with your report. I think there is, I'm afraid, a little bit of domestic politics in all of this, and that's perhaps understandable. Of it all, you know, opening a legal action in Strasbourg does not necessarily mean an end to the need to talk diplomatically, and I would urge both governments to do so rather than waiting for what I think would be a rather lengthy piece of litigation. And the history of interstate litigation in Strasbourg is not a happy one. It tends to take many years, and that just leads to more delay for victims and their families.
You know, as you say, you know, the Irish government have brought this under the ECHR, the European Convention on Human Rights. Complying with the ECHR is obviously part of the Good Friday Agreement. You know, is it right for the ECHR to apply here?
Well, look, the ECHR underpins the Good Friday Agreement in a way that is deeply profound, and it's all related to historic and localised issues about trust in the integrity of the judicial process, to be frank. That's why it was underpinned in that way. You know, it's been echoed then by the 2014 Stormont House Agreement. Let's not forget we've got domestic challenge to this bill from representatives of families in the Northern Ireland courts. And I think it might have been perhaps advisable for the Republic of Ireland to have awaited that domestic challenge within Northern Ireland to happen before launching these interstate proceedings.
We've obviously been talking a lot about the ECHR recently. Feels like we're all kind of experts in it after the Rwanda bill. Some of your colleagues want the UK to pull out of it entirely. They're worried, I guess, about the supremacy of the UK Parliament. Are they right?
No. British Conservative lawyers wrote the convention back in the late 40s with very good reason. We have a proud Conservative legacy of supporting the ECHR, and I think any responsible Conservative government would want to uphold that legacy and show leadership in Europe at a time when Ukraine, a member of the Council of Europe, is under attack from a former member that has left. What an inappropriate time to even consider withdrawal from the convention. You know, we should be, as Conservatives, absolutely standing up for it. It is a profoundly unconservative thing to do to want to leave this particular institution. It's not a problem in terms of British law. You know, the number of times we're found in breach of it as a country are negligible. I really think that this is the reddest of red herrings, and colleagues would be better off focusing on domestic law and the domestic policy that really underpins what's going on with the Rwanda issue.
There's one other thing I did want to talk to you about, because we were speaking earlier on the programme to your colleague, or former colleague, I should say, Dominic Grieve, who was saying that he's frustrated, shall we say, at the state of the Conservative Party, and that right now he feels like he doesn't know who he could vote for at the next election. He feels like he might even spoil his ballot. What would you say to him?
Well, I would say no. You know, Dominic and I have both been in the trenches supporting our brand of One Nation conservatism for many years. I know that's what he and I share with a passion, and I still believe that it is worth defending, and I think particularly worth defending against a Labour Party that at best is unready, I think, for government, and at worst will probably be a considerably more left-wing Labour government than anything Tony Blair and Gordon Brown ever offered, if you start to examine what it is that they want to do.
That's interesting. You say that it might be a more left-wing Labour government. What about Rishi Sunak? Is he a One Nation Conservative? I'm asking that actually quite genuinely. I feel like sometimes I struggle to place him.
Well, look, I think Rishi Sunak is somebody who wants to work within the norms. He clearly doesn't want the party to start breaching its legal obligations either here or abroad. He's somebody who is driven, I think, by the right motivations in politics. He's a hard worker. He believes in, I think, all the moral norms that I would want a Prime Minister to believe in. I think he's a good Conservative, and the Conservative Party is a wide, broad church, wide coalition. I think he deserves our support, and he's got the right approach on the economy, and that's what is going to decide this election, not issues of wokery or culture wars. It's all going to be about the economy.
OK, thank you very much. It's great to have you on the programme today. So Robert
Buckland
speaking to us there. The subject of the stories that we are covering tonight, inflation and UK-Irish relations, well, they're sure to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Mirror's Associate Editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Telegraph's Deputy Comment Editor, Annabel Denham. What did you make of the Robert Buckland sort of comment says? In the trenches together.
In the trenches together, he's a good friend, vast colleague in Parliament. I agreed 100% with what he said in respect of the ECHR. The difficulty, though, is I think the government made a mistake when they promised in 2019 to bring in this legislation, which was aimed to satisfy veterans' organisations. I know a lot about the subject. I was Attorney General. We've had to grapple with the issues of inquests, and they are problematical. But to just try to cut through that and say there are going to be no more inquiries, whether it's about terrorist or prosecutions, whether it's about terrorist action or the action of our own armed forces, it succeeded in uniting everybody in Northern Ireland who said that they didn't want it.
Quite hard to do.
Quite a hard thing to do. And I'm afraid that the Irish government's position is perfectly understandable, although Robert Buckland rightly made the point they didn't have to do this because it's going to go to the European Court of Human Rights anyway, because there are individual challenges that have been brought. So it is in part a piece of politics by the Irish government, but one to which I have to say I think they were entitled to do in view of the fact that they say that it's a breach of what they see as a fundamental of the Good Friday Agreement.
Well, Ayesha, what's your take on this? It's a really difficult thing to comment on.
It's a really difficult thing to comment on, and I think sometimes when we sit here in Westminster and London, we often sort of pronounce on things in Northern Ireland, and many of us don't really have a clue about the sensitivities, about the history, about the fact that this is not just kind of forgotten pain for a lot of people. I mean, that was felt very keenly during all the Brexit shenanigans when lots of kind of, decisions were being made here without people even really spending enough time in Northern Ireland and speaking to people. So I feel like this is another example where we in Westminster have sort of ploughed ahead with something which, as you say, when you look at all the different groups representing the victims, the families from across the divide, they had many, many issues, and they were very public about raising them. They weren't sort of doing them in secret. This was something that people objected to right from the beginning. So I feel like this is one of those things where it's kind of like a top-down decision has been taken from here in London, which hasn't really fully appreciated all the views in Northern Ireland.
To be honest, the thing that stood out for me on the programme with all the different people we've spoken to is that lady who was talking to David Blevins about her husband and how she's feeling all those years on. You could see that impact.
It remains an absolutely live issue, whichever side of the divide you may be on. And as I say, although I do accept the UK government has a real problem here, because the truth is these inquests are often incredibly difficult to conduct at all. There's classified material, there's issues about informants. It presents massive challenges. And I think in truth, it's very unlikely that there will be successful prosecutions of anybody, be they former terrorists or actually former members of the armed forces. But for all that, to have just brought down the guillotine as they have done, even though they may have a system in place to try and bring about reconciliation and cooperation and people admitting what they've done. I think that they did not read the mood in Northern Ireland correctly, And in the context of our relations with the Irish government, which are at a delicate stage anyway post-Brexit, and there are lots of problems that Brexit has generated, I think that it was almost inevitable that the Irish government was going to react in the way they have.
And I think, look, there's always a place for reconciliation, and I think formal processes of truth and reconciliation, because you speak to a younger generation now who do want to sort of move on from that. But I think the problem with this is this looks like it's a bit of a fig leaf to kind of put an end to all the other stuff, which, as Dominic says, it's complicated, it's expensive, it takes a lot of time. And it feels like at the moment there's a bit of a sort of backlash to having inquiries and inquests. We of course know from the Savile inquiry that did take a long time. Although I think actually one of David Cameron's best moments as Prime Minister, when he, you know, said on behalf, he apologised, and that was quite a significant sort of move forward. But I think the danger with this is the government here looks like they've picked a side, tried to close it down. They're using Truth and Reconciliation as a look, just go over here. And I think it's sort of doing a disservice to that in and of itself.
Thanks both. Really important subject to be discussing today. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Junior doctors begin a 3-day strike over pay and conditions and accuse the government of refusing to negotiate while industrial action is taking place. Hello, welcome back. Well, as ever, our digital politics hub has been covering the day's big political stories as they happened. And I've got a couple that I want to show you, including this one here. So this is the Scottish Government that confirmed earlier it's taking no further legal action against Westminster. It's after the UK government vetoed its controversial gender reform bill that effectively rules out the bill's current chances of becoming law. And then we can go to Wales for our next story. This is Mark Drakeford, Wales's outgoing First Minister Mark Drakeford. There he is there. He said he would turn down the offer of a seat in the House of Lords. He's described Westminster's upper house as a democratic anachronism. Plus, finally, there's been quite a lot of social media chat after this tweet was sent by the Department for Transport earlier. So it's boasting that £235 million is being spent on improving roads in London, and that has been allowed by rerouted HS2 funding. So the issue, of course, was that the spending for London base was made under the government's Network North banner for transport improvements. Labour, as you might expect, used it as an opportunity to describe Rishi Sunak as ludicrously out of touch. So kind of using funding about levelling up around the rest of the UK to improve services in London. Plus, if you scan the QR code, you can catch up with all the latest on the Hub throughout the day. Now, junior doctors have begun a 3-day strike in a dispute over pay. The latest industrial action's been criticised by the Health Secretary, who claimed it would mean that some patients staying in hospital over Christmas unnecessarily. There could also be further disruption in January, with medics threatening to walk out for 6 consecutive days, right when NHS winter pressures hit their peak. Here's our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi.
Hi, Mum. I'll do the nose as well. Yeah, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm doing okay.
Audrey is in pain. She's lost all feeling in her feet. She's diabetic and needs weekly dialysis. So it's a worrying sign. And as someone who needs regular care, Audrey's angry with the government for not meeting the junior doctors' pay demands.
They'll get overtired and then might also just say, no, I'm tired. Look for another hospital. Do they want us to die without doctors?
The 9 days of industrial action over Christmas and the New Year by junior doctors will be the longest ever in the NHS and hits at the hardest possible time.
This is the older patients unit of the hospital's emergency department. It's 11:30 in the morning. It's the first day of the doctors' strikes. There are 6 beds here, and they all have patients in them already.
Longer ambulance waits, winter infections rising, and problems with patient discharge.
So I've got 2 patients that I've accepted that can go into 21 and 24, but that's obviously not going to then give you space.
Add strikes to the mix, and you can see why there's real concern.
It is worrying already, and we are bracing for it to get worse, especially coming into January month. It's going to be a bit difficult for us to cope, but we will try our best. That's all that we can do.
On strike days, all resources must be deployed to the hospital's emergency services. Everything else, including non-urgent operations, has to stop.
In order to provide safe care for those most in need, we do have to postpone some outpatient clinics and occasionally some operations. We will treat those patients quickly, we'll get them back in as quickly as we possibly can, but that will increase the delay to them, and that's obviously something I'm very sorry about.
The BMA says the government's current pay offer would amount to a cut for many of its members after years of below-inflation pay rises.
We thought we'd be able to get round the table with the government and explain the issues thoroughly. But it took them 6 months to come to the table in May. And after May, it took them another 6 months to come back to the table. So all of the delays have been caused by the government, and they've pushed us into the dead of winter.
But the government says patients could be forced to needlessly spend Christmas in hospital and urge junior doctors to call off their industrial action.
Junior doctors, the committee appeared to expect consultants and others to pick up their work for them. And I'm very conscious, it's been a tough year for all our clinicians. I want them to be able to enjoy their Christmas and enjoy their rest as much as we all want to, but they're going to be picking up the slack for these doctors that are on strike.
Audrey should be home in time for Christmas, but she knows if she needs care over the next 3 weeks, she will have to wait much longer for it. Ashish Joshi, Sky News, at the Royal Berkshire Hospital in Reading.
Coming up next on the Politics Hub. A Christmas tradition for political leaders heading out to visit the troops. But why do they do it?
Which has been #1 for the last 2 weeks, and looking at the midweek figures, they release some sort of vague idea of where things are. They are the leader at the moment with Wham.
Should we have a listen?
Yeah, absolutely.
Christmas #1 at the time, was it, when he first released
No,
it?
1984, it was kept off by Band-Aid, although it was #1 apparently very briefly in Ireland for a week.
Is that
before
right?
Band-Aid came in. And I was reading this morning, apparently it's Germany's most successful Christmas song ever, chart-wise.
Is that right?
Apparently.
Now, I thought it was going to be Fairy Tale of New York.
Even before Shane MacGowan passed away, there was a sense that it could be this year. This has never been to #1 in any sense, let alone at Christmas. It's in the race, it's in the top 10 according to the figures, and there is a physical version of the single that's came out, I think, on Tuesday. So there is a chance that it could contribute to the, move up the chart. But I mean, it just looks like Wham, from what I'm hearing in the industry, it has such a big lead at the moment.
Let's have a listen to Fairy Tale of New York.
When the band finished playing, they held out for more. Sinatra was swinging, all the junk they were singing. We kissed on a corner, then danced through the night. The boys of the NYPD choir were singing, go away, babe. And the bells were ringing out for Christmas Day.
It was amazing in the church, wasn't it? For his funeral.
Fabulous, yeah, with Lisa and Hill filling in.
How do they decide what's the Christmas #1?
So it's a combination of streams and physical sales, and the way they do it with streams is if it's an old track, they don't count as there's a formula. So new songs, I think it's 1,000 streams count for one sale or something like that. Older songs, it's more, because obviously they don't want the chart full of old songs at the rest of the year. However, if you release a single, as Wham have done, there's a 7-inch version of Last Christmas and the Pogues have done, you can sort of become a new single again. And so I think that's why, the Pogues and Last Christmas are in the running. And it'll be interesting to see in future years. And like Mariah Carey's floating around at #3, but that's still on the older song rate. So who knows, next year, the record label might say, well, we could do a single for that.
Okay, here we go.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, this week, Rishi Sunak visited RAF Lossiemouth to praise the sacrifice of those in the military who work over Christmas. It's part of a long tradition of political leaders heading out to visit the troops. All right, let's talk again, shall we, to Ayesha and Dominic. It does feel like it's become like a real Christmas tradition, like, carol singing, mince pies, and the PM jetting out to shake hands with some of the troops, Ayesha.
I think it's sort of one of those things where, they feel that they want to do it and they have to do it. And of course, our boys and our girls out there having a, tough time. And quite a lot of it, though, is a bit of a kind of PR optic, because I'm sure it's really nice for the troops to say, oh, yes, the Prime Minister's taking time out of his or her busy schedule. But probably at the back of their mind is, where's the money for all the resources we need as well? Because this is an ongoing battle between the MOD and resources. And are you going to ring fence the budget? And are you going to... So I think it's one of those things that probably makes the PM and his team probably feel slightly better than the troops.
I think that's fair comment. And there's nothing more cynical about politicians than members of the armed forces. They will enjoy it. After all, it breaks their routine. And as a consequence, one or two things will probably happen around the place that's being visited, which wouldn't happen otherwise. So even the quality of the food may improve for the occasion.
That's true.
So I think that they're not unappreciative of this attention, but at the same time, they know the reality. And Aisha's right. Our armed forces are chronically underfunded for the roles that we're demanding of them. And they're aware of that. And they But they'll be very polite. They won't actually say that directly to the Prime Minister when he goes to have lunch with them.
And that's a really important point, because one of the greatest fears, if you're a press advisor, which is the job I used to do, is your boss having an absolute nightmare, you know, somebody at hospital going, where's all the money, or blah, 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 whereas the troops are really well behaved. They're not. So it's actually it's a feel-good photo moment. It sends a good signal, and it's very low risk. It's a safe photo opportunity.
I did a trip out with David Cameron one Christmas to Camp Bastion, and it is true, you kind of just fly in, you fly out. It's a fleeting visit, a photo op, really, like you say. And there were a couple of pictures that we managed to dig out. This is 2013. He's got his power stance there. I like it.
His usual dark clothing. It's always his trademark with the...
Yeah. Exactly, but it also had one of my most embarrassing moments with a politician, because you fly out on these big military planes and, you know, it's a bit of a red eye, you know, and so I was asleep on the plane, and I just remember waking up and seeing the Prime Minister in front of me, and I was like, have I been snoring? Have I been dribbling? I was like, I need to say something, like, you know.
That's brilliant.
Try and compose myself now. Yeah, it was, I think it was okay. Well, or if I did, he didn't say anything about it.
Maybe you were talking in your sleep and said something really unembarrassing.
Yeah, can you imagine? Can you imagine? But it like you say, it does make you, I guess, it's an important thing to do, isn't it?
It is important, and I think it's actually now turned into a sort of Christmas tradition. 30 years ago, this didn't happen. It really started with the first Iraq War. I think John Major went out to see the troops who were in Saudi Arabia. And then, of course, Blair started doing it continuously with Iraq and with Afghanistan. And it's now institutionalised. It's interesting, he went to Lossiemouth, because actually our overseas deployments at the moment are rather limited.
Well, the ones we can talk about,
The ones we can talk about. So he went up to Lossiemouth, and I'm sure they were appreciative of it.
Now, perhaps a braver thing to do would to be thanking and doing a photo call with public service workers, particularly in the NHS, but that is too high risk right now.
Yeah, that's a good point, isn't it? The ones perhaps who are working
over
extra
Christmas,
hours over Christmas.
the paramedics, the people in the hospital, all of those sort of people, and of course the police as well.
Would you be advising it if you're a PR to the Prime Minister?
Well, I think actually it would be quite a brave thing to do, but then that feeds into a bigger thing of, are you actually talking to these people, which feeds into your earlier report about the industrial action.
We're out of time. Great to have you both on the show today. That is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m, but next up it is the UK Tonight with Neil Patterson.